So Ben Bradshaw, 25 years you've been an MP. Why have you decided now's the time to throw the towel in?
Well, there's never a perfect time, Matt, as I'm sure you'd recognise in politics, and you can't determine the time because it's dependent on the electoral cycle. But I reckon 25 years is a good stint. If I stood again and won, I could be pushing 70 by the end of the next Parliament. I've never really imagined myself tottering around the Houses of Commons in my late 60s, and I also feel. A bit happier about doing it now because I think the Labour Party's in a better place and politics is competitive again, and that makes it easier to step back and give time for my successor to bed in before the next election. So
you mentioned the Labour Party being in better shape under Keir Starmer. You've been through every sort of shade. The highs of New Labour when you arrived in '97, then the TBGBs, Gordon Brown, Ed Miliband, Jeremy Corbyn, now Keir Starmer. Which was for you was the bit you were most happy in, and which was the bit when you were least happy?
Well, when I look back at the footage of the '97 election victory, I mean, I can't help saying that was the best time. But it was also, I was very conscious, that at that time that we would never have whatever the quote is, confident, glad morning again. That was as good as it was going to get. And obviously, the Blair and the Brown years for me under both leaders was fantastic because we did deliver a lot. I mean, in Exeter, the transformation in the city, we're still feeling it. The turnaround in our schools, for example, and a number of other things which wouldn't have happened without those governments. And to have had the privilege of serving as a minister under Tony and Gordon for 10 years is not a privilege that quite a lot of MPs have when they go into politics. So I was very lucky in terms of the timing in that. I mean, obviously the last few years in opposition has been a bit miserable. They were awful under Jeremy Corbyn. We went through hell at national and local level, but we've come through that now. We've got a lot of good new members who've joined the party. A lot of people who joined under Jeremy have left, so it's really tilted the balance of the party. Meetings are much more pleasant, and I feel for the first time really that I felt since 2008 that Labour has the chance of winning the next election. I haven't felt that at any time since then, and that I think has helped me make my decision that I can now leave the field to other people.
But talk me through the hell. How did that manifest itself from your perspective? Because Exeter's interesting because it's sort of this island of red Labour surrounded by, well, now blue, but at various times it's been blue and yellow, but in the whole of the southwest you had Exeter and Plymouth really, and that was the full extent of Labour. So how did the sort of Corbyn hell manifest itself for you?
I mean, where do you start? I think if you're someone like me who believes in politics that as being the art of the possible, and that you can only change people's lives for the better if you actually win elections and get into government. The simple fact was it was pretty clear to me, and I think to a lot of other people, that we would never win an election under Jeremy Corbyn, and indeed we suffered our worst defeat since 1935 just 2 years ago. So that for me was the main thing. But on top of that, you had a lot of people who joined the party who'd never been Labour. They came in from fringe far left groups, and they made meetings pretty horrible. They put off a lot of long-standing members, a lot of moderate people drifted away. They couldn't stand the atmosphere. And so at local level as well as national level, life was very difficult for people. I mean, it amazes me that so many people stood through those years and didn't give up, because there was a time when I think a lot of people felt, is this ever going to turn around? I was always confident it would turn around, but it was a hard slog. And one of the reasons I threw myself into Keir Starmer's campaign was I thought that he was the right man to bring us out of this period and bring the party back to a position where we could be electable. And I have to say I've been more than pleasantly surprised by what he's achieved so far. And what he has achieved also really helped shift the atmosphere in the party and the balance of opinion in the party, which is a prerequisite in my view for us ever getting back into government again.
Do you think it's a problem that Keir Starmer was in Jeremy Corbyn's shadow cabinet? I mean, you didn't take a job under Jeremy. I'm not sure. I suspect you probably didn't pick up the phone and ask, but you didn't take a job with Jeremy Corbyn. Is it a problem that Keir Starmer actually did go to the country and say, I think Jeremy Corbyn should be Prime Minister?
No, it's not, of course, because we all stand as individual constituency MPs. We ask people in our constituencies to elect us. And Keir was a new MP. I think he felt it was essential that we had somebody, who was competent given the importance of the Brexit brief at the time. And let's face it, if quite a lot of people hadn't agreed to serve in Jeremy Corbyn's shadow cabinet or shadow ministers, there wouldn't have been a shadow cabinet or shadow ministers, because the number of Labour MPs who shared Jeremy Corbyn's ideology were not enough to fill.
Would that not be better though,
cabinet.
if people hadn't served, and then that might have, hastened his removal as leader?
I just don't think that's. I don't think that's a credible position to take, because the fact was that there was a leadership challenge and he won, and until the members who in their wisdom elected him not once but twice had reached a point where they realised that this was not a very good idea if you wanted a Labour government. I think it was very difficult for individual MPs to take that decision. I think what's important is that the vast majority of us stayed. We stayed loyal to our values. We worked very hard in our constituencies to keep moderates in the party, and to greater or lesser extent succeeded. And in the end, we've got into a much better place. And I think everyone who played a role in that should feel real credit for it. And I feel very sad that some people didn't, and they gave up that fight. But I hope in time some of those will come back. Some already have.
And how do you rate Keir Starmer's chances? I mean, he's Labour are a long way behind. It's going to take a big shift in public opinion and the number of seats if he were to become Prime Minister. Is he Neil Kinnock cleaning up the mess from before, or is he Tony Blair who's going to actually deliver a sort of historic result?
He's neither. He's his own person, his own man, and I don't think we know the answer to that yet. I think his chances are better than Neil Kinnock's in terms of, I think people, when they look at Keir, they see a potential Prime Minister. They can imagine him standing on the steps of Downing Street. He passes that Downing Street doorstep test, which I'm not sure, for all of Neil's fantastic qualities, he ever really did. But yeah, I mean, look, for us to win the next election, we would need an unprecedented swing to Labour, bigger than the swing we had even under Tony Blair in 1997. We'd need to win seats, not just the red wall seats, but seats in the south of England that we've never won before. But I really wouldn't rule that out, given the state of the current government and the disaster, in my view, that has been the Johnson regime. I think we've got every chance of winning the next election. I think the electorate's very volatile. And as I say, I didn't know Keir very well when I volunteered to help in his campaign. I just thought he was the best candidate. But I have to admit, I didn't have full confidence, in terms of what he would do with the leadership. But he's more than exceeded my expectations. The way he's consolidated his power in the party, sorted out the NEC, got the votes through conference. Had a really good reshuffle, brought on the kind of people who you could imagine as cabinet ministers in the future Labour government. He's doing all the right things, and that gives me cause for optimism.
Over the years, the Conservatives have thrown the kitchen sink at trying to oust you. And when I was on the Western Morning News, they were constantly telling me they were going to get you out of Exeter with one candidate or another, and that's continued over the years. I was after you announced you were standing down, George Osborne tweeted, "Though I was part of repeated failed Tory attempts to oust you, Ben, in Exeter, it'll be sad." I'll do that again. Yeah, George Osborne tweeted, "Though I was part of repeated failed attempts to oust you, Ben, in Exeter, it'll be sad to see you leave the Commons. I enjoyed our many jousts over the years. You've been a voice of moderation and progress." How much pressure did you come under the Conservatives in Exeter? Because obviously you took the Conservatives off. You took the seat off the Conservatives back in '97.
Yeah,
they repeatedly tried to get it back without success. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it's three things. Part of it is, the '97 campaign was so toxic for the Tories because of the candidate they put up. And you may remember this, but he ran the most extraordinary homophobic campaign against me, which when I tell young people now about, they are absolutely gobsmacked. They cannot believe that this happened only 25 years ago. And he delivered votes to me, including traditional Tory votes to me in spades. And
take us through that campaign for people who don't know the story.
Well, I was the first openly gay Labour MP to be selected and elected as openly gay, and I happened to be selected against a Tory candidate who ran something called the Conservative Family Campaign. It was basically the sort of moral majority, whatever you want to call it, campaign at the time, and he was the person that the media would always go to if they wanted a homophobic quote. So part of the attraction, I have to say, for me running in Exeter, apart from the fact I was from there, was that he was the Tory candidate, and I thought that if I was selected, that it would provoke him into saying all sorts of extraordinary things, and indeed it did. And he really misjudged the election. He said things like, if Ben Bradshaw is elected, your children will be in danger. And he said Ben Bradshaw is a homosexual, rides a bicycle, works for the BBC, speaks German, is everything about our country that is wrong. I mean, he just managed to alienate all these voter groups without me really having to do very much. I only really had to kind of appear reasonable really, to sweep up, and that did long-term damage to the Tory party in Exeter. But apart from that, it's about politics, organisation and delivery, and we've always maintained that the electoral coalition in Exeter, actually, that we won under Tony Blair in 1997, we never let it go. That's the first reason we've held on to the seat. The second thing is organisation. We have one of the best organised parties in the country, and that's about the culture. And the third thing is delivery. We've got an MP who I hope people feel has delivered. We've got a Labour council, which is one of the best councils in the country, has delivered consistently. And that's the winning formula. It's not really rocket science, and I just wish that it had been replicated more often in other places.
Well, I was going to ask you about that, the extent to which, maybe it's because you took it from the Conservatives and you had to, fight to take it and then to hold on to it. Do you think it's... People talk about the Red Wall, but actually there were loads of places around the country where Labour, Scotland being another prime example, where the Labour Party essentially took things for granted, didn't do all that stuff you were talking about. And actually there's, it's going to be really difficult to reverse that in Scotland. It could potentially be difficult to reverse that in some of those parts of the north as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously there are particular challenges in Scotland given the whole independence thing. But I mean, I remember going and fighting by-elections in Scotland and indeed some constituents in the north of England where you turn up and you'd say to the organiser, you're out knocking on doors, we don't appear to have very much data in this constituency, and they would tell me, well, there's never been any canvassing done ever. And we always have a contact rate of 70 or 80% in Exeter. We know.
So explain what that means.
Well, it means that in any 1 year we have spoken to 70% of the voters in that constituency by going door to door, which is something I still do every Saturday with a team of volunteers. And in an election campaign we do it intensively for 6 weeks, 10, 12 hours a day, walking 20 miles a day. And you build up a database of where your support is, which means that on election day you can get your supporters out, but also you can keep in touch with them. And it is still inexplicable to me that there are constituency Labour parties where that doesn't happen, because if you don't know what your voters are thinking and what their priorities are, how on earth can you serve them and respond to their concerns and expect to get their vote?
Let me turn to some of the other things that we want to come on. We might clip out. Would you recommend, given everything you've talked about going through, whether it's the homophobia when you were selected, the what happened with Jeremy Corbyn, would you recommend to your loved ones to become an MP today? Yeah, I mean it's the greatest privilege I think that anyone can have in a democracy is to serve as an elected representative. I mean, whatever you think of the flaws in our system and the current troubles we're going through, it's a massive thrill to me since I announced I was standing down. The number of people who've contacted me or who've just come up to me in the street and wanted to talk to me, or they've got an anecdote, or they to reminisce about something, and it is an honourable profession when it's done properly and well, and the source of huge satisfaction when particularly if you have the chance of serving in government and really making changes that make a big difference to people's lives. So I would strongly encourage people to think about it, and but go in with our eyes open, because it's not for everyone, and it has its downsides as well as its upsides. Tell me about the low traffic neighbourhoods plan, and particularly the politics of it. You're a Labour council. You've got the Conservatives who don't like it, but you've also got the Greens are very dominant. We've seen what happens if the Greens are dominant in Brighton and Bristol and so on. How do you sort of navigate your way through that? Even if you think it's a good idea, the politics of it is quite interesting.
Well, Exeter's Labour Council has been pretty green long before most people were even talking about these issues. And I remember when we had a Labour government, we delivered Exeter was one of the Labour government's cycling demonstration towns, and we delivered a big expansion in cycle networks. But I think I think now, I mean, I think everyone recognises across political parties, and the interesting thing is, of course, that this is a consensus now. I mean, even the Conservative government wants local authorities to do this, but at local level, you do often encounter a lot of opposition. And although the Greens may say in theory they want it, actually when it comes to individual schemes, they tend to face both ways. But understandably, we've been trying to push this through in Exeter. It's not always easy because we have a Labour city council but a Conservative county councillor that has only recently really been getting engaged on this issue. But we have a growing city, so congestion is a real problem. Lots more housing, lots more traffic. If we don't do something about it to manage this, then issues with pollution and congestion are just going to get worse. And I think people understand it in theory, but when it comes to some of the individual plans, they find it more difficult. And we're still not really at a point where you can have a conversation with people where you say, you do realise if we don't do this, we won't have a habitable world for your grandchildren and great-grandchildren. They're just thinking about, the inconvenience it might cause them. They might have to drive a bit further to get from A to B, etc., etc. And we still don't really have a drive from the top in government to persuade people that given half of journeys in cities are under 2 miles, these are journeys that by any able-bodied person could be done by bike or on foot if cycling and walking was made safer and more pleasant.
That's absolutely spot on. Last couple of questions. Would you take a seat in the House of Lords?
No. Well, I tell you what. If Labour, I'll do a deal with you on this. Okay. If Keir and Labour go into the next election promising the abolition of the House of Lords or its replacement with an elected Assembly of the Regions based on PR, I would consider going in to help push that through. But I have absolutely no expectation or desire to be asked, because one of the things I'm looking forward to about stepping down is not being beholden to anyone and being free to do what I like.
Go back to radio. You were in radio beforehand.
I love radio. I still think radio is the best medium. It's infinitely superior to television. The pictures are much better on radio, as we used to say. Look, I don't know what I'm going to do, Matt. When I watch those people who've retired well, they've tended to do nothing for a year while they make up their minds if that's what they want to do, or whether they do want to do something else. And that's my current plan. Do nothing for a year, tend my olive trees in Sicily, and then if I get bored with that, maybe I'll come back as a political commentator on radio if anyone would be interested in having me.
Oh, I'll definitely have you on Times Radio. You mentioned some anecdotes, people coming up to you. When you look back on being an MP, what's the sort of story that leaps into your mind of just how it's a mad way to spend 25 years?
Well, something that's I suppose relevant to current events is that, and I can't remember which election day this was, but there was one election day, and it would have been in the middle of the expenses scandal, where somebody called Sue Gray spent her day phoning every cabinet minister to go through their expenses with a fine-tooth comb to work out whether or not they were going to be in trouble. And she actually called me on election day while I was knocking up, and I said, Sue, you do realise it's election day and I'm flat out kind of walking the streets of Exeter knocking up. She said, oh, I'm terribly sorry, but we do need to straighten this out. So I spent half an hour on the phone on election day to Sue Gray talking through my expenses, which thankfully were fine. But I mean, that is a kind of thing that I think a lot of people don't realise goes on, that you have the pressures and the contact and the very day-to-day life in your constituency as a constituency MP, and you have to balance that sometimes, particularly if you're a minister, with issues of high office, and sometimes that interface can feel quite ridiculous at times.
I suppose it's like that scene in the Loop, the Orange Iannucci film, when there's the Secretary of State trying to basically stop a war, but he's also dealing with a constituent's wall that's fallen over or something. Last thing I want to ask you about, Ben, because when I saw the news, and I think I tweeted this, but several other people said the same thing. Lots of people say you've got the best hair in the House of Commons. Why is your hair so impressive? Do you look after it? Is it just naturally so bouffant?
It's genes, isn't it? I mean, aren't your hair all about your grandfather's genes, your maternal grandfather's genes? I mean, it's genetic. It's probably helped by the fact to have a good diet and plenty of exercise. I don't know whether the yoga helps, but in terms of overall fitness, fit and healthy. But no, I mean, I'm not claiming any secret here. It's I think the hair is the luck of the genetic draw. I'm afraid.
Well, like the rest of you, your hair will be much missed in the House of Commons. Ben Bradshaw, thanks so much for joining us on Times Radio.
Pleasure.